Grandpa didn't say a single word. He just walked past the picnic table, holding his welding torch like a preacher holds a Bible, and knelt beside the first ATV. Everyone thought he was joking, until the sparks flew and the stink of scorched rubber filled the air. Karen's mouth hung open like a dropped barn door as her friend's ride hissed and groaned into permanent retirement against our fence. I swear, the birds stopped chirping just to watch. That morning started normal. Rooster crowed too early, the sky was gold with promise, and Grandpa was halfway through his coffee when he squinted out toward the east field. We were supposed to spend the day repairing a stretch of the old cattle fence that had been weathered to splinters, but something out there had grabbed his attention. He leaned forward in his rocking chair and frowned. I followed his gaze and saw them, 4 ATVs lined up along the edge of our pasture like show ponies. People I didn't recognize were hauling coolers, folding chairs, and an entire pop-up tent out of their vehicles. They were spreading out blankets like it was a 4th of July barbecue. Grandpa lowered his cup onto the porch railing, the liquid inside still steaming. "That ain't our family," he said flatly. I nodded. "That's not anyone's family. That's strangers, Grandpa." He stood slowly, like a mountain deciding to shift. Without another word, he reached for his hat, slipped on his boots, and marched down the steps. I followed close behind, more curious than concerned at that point. After all, people sometimes took wrong turns. Maybe they didn't know. Maybe it was innocent. But the woman in the center of the gathering wasn't giving off innocent energy. Blonde bob haircut, oversized sunglasses, pink blouse that looked like it cost more than my monthly feed bill, and a walk that screamed she expected everyone to get out of her way. Karen Granger. I didn't know her name then, but I knew the type. She was instructing the others like she owned the field. Told a guy to anchor the flag near the big rock, and another to park the ATVs where they don't ruin the aesthetic. Our land. Our field. And she was using it like her private Instagram backdrop. Grandpa reached the fence and leaned against it, arms crossed. "Morning," he said, calm as a lake before a storm. Karen turned, holding a glass bottle of imported water. "Hi there. Oh, is this your land?" He nodded. "Been in the family 3 generations." She smiled like she was being generous. "Oh, perfect. We just needed a nice open space for the afternoon. The community park is under maintenance and I remembered seeing this beautiful field during our little drive last week. You don't mind, do you? We'll be gone before sundown." Grandpa didn't blink. You passed 3 no trespassing signs." She laughed, like it was a charming quirk. "Oh, those are probably just old. This is community space, right? My cousin's on the HOA board. He says this whole area falls under shared recreational designation." "No, this is private agricultural land. It's not for picnics, not for parties, and sure as hell not for ATVs." Karen took a small step back, her smile twitching. "Well, I don't see any livestock." "They'll be here tomorrow. You'll be gone today." Karen huffed. "We're not doing any harm. Just a couple hours. Come on, don't be so dramatic." Grandpa pointed at the sweet tea glass he'd left back on the porch. "You've got until I finish that." She laughed again, but it sounded more strained this time. "All right, fine. Just a short visit." We walked back to the porch and sat down. Grandpa didn't pick up the tea. He just stared across the field like he was measuring wind speed. I'd seen that look before. It was the same one he had when coyotes snuck near the chicken coop or when that one contractor tried to cheat him on fencing material. That wasn't a look you wanted aimed your way. Karen and her friends carried on like they were royalty. Loud music, lawn games, kids running wild, drinks flowing like it was their land. One of the men revved an ATV and did a donut right next to our hay bale stack. That was when Grandpa stood up, brushed the dust off his jeans, and headed to the barn. I thought he might call the sheriff. Or maybe drag out the hose and spray them like feral cats. But what he came back with was quieter. More dangerous. He was carrying his welding torch, gloves tucked into his belt, a small spool of wire in one hand. He walked across the yard without hurry, stepped through the gate, and approached the first ATV like he was checking its tire pressure. The man beside it was sipping beer and barely glanced at him. Grandpa knelt down, adjusted his gloves, and fired up the torch. The man jumped. "Whoa! What are you doing?" Grandpa didn't answer. He clamped a metal brace around the ATV's axle and welded it to the thick corner of our fence rail. Sparks flew. The engine frame sizzled as the man backed away, sputtering and shouting. Karen came running. "Are you insane? You can't do that. That's vandalism." Grandpa stood up slowly, smoke rising from the metal, and finally looked her in the eye. "You trespassed. That's a felony. I'm just making sure you don't do it again before the sheriff gets here." "I swear," she went 5 shades of red. "You're going to regret this." Grandpa pulled out his phone and held it up. "Already recorded. You want to add resisting to the list." Karen froze. The others stood in awkward silence. No one dared touch the ATVs now. The guy whose ride got welded just stared at it, slack-jawed. The tea glass on the porch sat there untouched. But Karen's time was up, and the real consequences were just getting started. The silence after the welding was so thick you could have cut it with a rusted butter knife. Karen stood there shaking, lips twitching like she had 10 comebacks fighting to get out, but none brave enough to face Grandpa's steady glare. One of the men, a guy in khaki shorts and designer sunglasses, muttered something about calling the cops. Grandpa didn't even look at him. He just moved to the next ATV like he was repairing a lawnmower on a lazy Sunday. The torch hissed back to life, and sparks danced again. I don't know if it was the smell of melting rubber or the slow horror spreading through the picnic group's faces, but that's when they finally realized this wasn't just some grumpy old man. This was a man who'd dealt with trespassers before, and made sure they remembered. Karen's friend Janice stepped forward, trying a different approach. "Sir," she said, voice sugar-coated and brittle, "we didn't know. Honestly. This was all Karen's idea. We thought it was, okay." Grandpa didn't stop welding. "Ignorance isn't innocence. You crossed a locked gate." Karen threw her arms up. "It wasn't locked. That's because my dog chased the mailman this morning and I left it open for him to return the package. Doesn't change the fact you had to pass 2 signs to get in here." By the time the second ATV was welded clean through to the fence post, nobody dared touch anything. The kids were quiet now, huddled around the cooler like it offered protection. One guy tried dragging his vehicle away, only to find the wheel wouldn't budge without snapping the frame. He let go, hands up like he'd just heard a shotgun chamber click. Karen turned to her phone and started dialing, probably thinking the law would be on her side. I heard her say words like crazy, violent, weapon, and children in danger, which was ironic considering the only danger came from their own exhaust pipes and poor decisions. She ended the call and turned toward Grandpa, confidence returning like a bad rash. "Deputy Willis is on his way. He'll sort this out." Grandpa stood up, wiped his gloves off on a rag, and gave her the faintest of nods. "I figured you'd call him." I looked between the two of them and realized something she didn't. Deputy Willis was practically family. Grew up 3 houses down. Went to high school with my dad. Rode this land on dirt bikes as a kid and once broke his arm trying to jump a ditch behind the barn. Karen had no idea she just summoned a man who'd probably ask Grandpa if he needed backup or a new canister of welding gas. While we waited, Karen tried rallying her crew. "This is entrapment," she hissed. "We didn't do anything wrong. He damaged our property. You all saw it." The guy whose ATV got torched gave her a look that could have melted steel faster than Grandpa's torch. "You said it was fine. You said it was part of the HOA's land. That man welded my ride to a damn fence. You think I wanted him to? I didn't expect a farmer to act like a war vet with a grudge." From where I stood, I could tell that was the moment her credibility cracked in half. Her friends started packing up slowly, folding chairs clinking, paper plates flapping in the breeze, but they were careful not to touch the ATVs. It was as if they were contaminated now. Cursed objects. Everyone stood back, hoping they wouldn't be next. 10 minutes later, a white county truck pulled up, dust trailing behind it like a smoke signal. Deputy Willis stepped out, sunglasses on, hand resting loosely near his belt. He took one look at the scene, ATVs frozen in place like modern art installations, Karen with arms folded and lip trembling, Grandpa wiping down his torch, and immediately chuckled. "Now, what in God's quiet earth is going on here?" he asked. Karen launched into her speech, full of outrage and carefully selected buzzwords. "He's violent. He used that tool to trap us. There are children here, for God's sake. We were having a peaceful picnic and he came out welding like a maniac." Deputy Willis turned to Grandpa. "You weld anything you weren't supposed to?" Grandpa shrugged. "Just a few trespassing toys. They parked them on my land. Figured I'd keep them here, till someone could sort it out legally." Willis nodded like he was hearing a man explain how he harvested tomatoes. Then he turned to Karen. "You got any documentation saying you're allowed to be on this land?" Karen hesitated. Well, my cousin is on the HOA board and he said." Willis held up a hand. The HOA doesn't govern this land. This field's private property. Been that way longer than I've been alive. You passed multiple warning signs and brought vehicles onto a field without permission. That's textbook trespassing." Karen's face went pale. "But he damaged our property." Willis tilted his head. "Interesting. Did he damage it before or after y'all ignored a no trespassing sign, parked unauthorized vehicles, and set up camp like it was your backyard?" Nobody answered. Willis pulled out his notebook and began writing. "Names. All of you. And if you're not the owner of one of those ATVs, don't stand too close. I'm tagging this whole mess for record." Karen's friends, now visibly irritated, began muttering under their breath. One of them, a guy in a muscle tank and flip-flops, stepped toward her. "I'm not getting fined because of you, Karen. You said this was handled. You said we were allowed here." She turned to him, voice trembling. "Don't blame me. How was I supposed to know this guy was insane?" "I'm not insane," Grandpa said from his porch, finally picking up his tea. "I'm patient. There's a difference." Deputy Willis didn't even crack a smile. You and your friends are going to receive citations for trespassing. You'll also be liable for environmental impact on preserved agricultural land if this gets escalated. Which, considering you ran ATVs on it, it just might." Karen's jaw dropped. "This is insane. We didn't destroy anything." "Intent doesn't override impact," Willis replied, scribbling notes. "You can argue it in court. But I'd recommend apologizing and leaving now. And next time you feel like having a picnic, try a public park." Karen didn't speak again. She simply grabbed her designer bag, stormed over to her immobilized ATV, and stared at it like it had betrayed her. One by one, the others trudged back to their vehicles, defeated. Grandpa leaned against the porch post, sipping slowly. The sun caught his face just right, and I swear I saw a smile twitch the corner of his mouth. Willis walked back to his truck and looked over at Grandpa. "Need a hand getting those off later?" Grandpa nodded. "Might. But no rush. I think they are serving a purpose right where they are." And with that, the field was quiet again, except for the soft creak of Grandpa's rocker and the low hiss of hot metal cooling in the breeze. 2 days after the showdown in the field, Karen came back, but this time she wasn't dressed for a picnic. She pulled up in a black sedan with tinted windows, stepping out in heels and a stiff blazer like she was preparing for a courtroom, not a ranch. She didn't bother knocking on the gate. Instead, she walked straight to the porch, heels sinking into the dirt like they had no business being there, and announced herself in a tone that was both defiant and brittle. Grandpa didn't even look up from the tractor he was fixing. I stood nearby, tightening bolts on a broken fence gate, pretending not to watch, though the tension in the air was thicker than molasses. Karen cleared her throat like a school teacher trying to get attention in a rowdy classroom. "I've come to resolve this misunderstanding." Grandpa straightened up and wiped his hands with a rag, slow and deliberate. "That's so." She nodded. "The HOA has reviewed everything, and it turns out there was some jurisdictional confusion. My cousin, Richard, believed that section of your property might fall within the boundaries of shared recreational zoning. There was no malicious intent. Grandpa raised one eyebrow. And did your cousin review the deed? Karen's face twitched. We've requested access through the county clerk. Until that's clarified, I think it's best if we all consider this an unfortunate event that doesn't need further escalation. He tossed the rag over his shoulder and crossed his arms. You mean the kind of escalation where I file a formal complaint with the Agricultural Land Board and the county zoning office? Because I already did. That stopped her cold. Excuse me. 3 forms, 2 phone calls, and 1 state agent coming to inspect the tire tracks you left through 2 acres of hayfield. Turns out, recreational vehicles on protected AG land is a big ol' no-no. Especially when it's filed by a family that's been here since the Eisenhower administration. Karen's mouth opened, but nothing came out. She quickly switched strategies. Look, I'm here in good faith. I didn't mean to disrespect your land. It was supposed to be a simple gathering. Nobody got hurt. But the land did, Grandpa said. Topsoil churned up by 4-wheelers, fencing scratched by bumpers, and the south corner gate nearly got ripped off. And then there's the matter of you lying about HOA rights. Her smile was gone now. She was holding her clutch so tight it looked like it might snap. So what do you want? Money? A written apology? I want folks to stop thinking they can treat this place like an empty lot in a development. I want your board to strike any mention of shared usage related to my land from their map. And I want a public statement from your cousin clearing it all up. Karen shook her head. That's not going to happen. Grandpa smiled. Then I guess I'll see you in court. And your cousin too. She didn't expect that. She stared at him like she'd just realized he wasn't some retired hillbilly with a grudge. He was the kind of man who didn't start fights, but knew exactly how to finish them. She turned on her heel and stumped back to her car, but not before stepping directly into a fresh patch of manure one of our calves had thoughtfully deposited by the drive. Her shriek echoed for half a mile, and I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing. The very next morning, a white pickup with a state seal on the door pulled into our yard. Out stepped Agent Cheryl Haskins, clipboard in hand and steel in her eyes. She didn't smile, didn't waste time. She shook Grandpa's hand and walked the perimeter of the damaged field, taking photos of every tire groove, every torn patch of grass, and the weld still holding those ATVs in place like embarrassing lawn ornaments. She asked no fewer than 30 questions, most of which Grandpa answered with a nod, a shrug, or a date pulled straight from memory. The woman was thorough, and by the time she left, she looked more annoyed with Karen than we were. From what I see, you have a solid case, she said, snapping the folder shut. It's going to get complicated for them. They violated state guidelines, trespassed on protected land, and misrepresented land use rights. The HOA board's going to have to answer for that. The words hung in the air like thunder before a storm. Grandpa didn't gloat. He didn't need to. He just went back to fixing the tractor, whistling a tune I didn't recognize but instantly knew was one of victory. Later that week, the local paper ran a small headline on the back page, "Community Group Faces Investigation Over Land Use Mix-Up." It didn't name Karen, but the whole town knew. The article detailed how the state was reviewing misuse of recreational claims by the HOA board and how one of the complaints came from a respected rancher whose property was illegally accessed. Karen must have seen it too, because she stopped showing up to HOA meetings. Rumor had it she tried spinning the story online, but someone posted a picture of the ATVs welded to our fence, and the comments turned brutal. One read, "Hope she packed a sawzall in that picnic basket." Another said, "That grandpa's got more bite than our mayor." By the end of the month, HOA leadership released an official statement clarifying that the eastern properties bordering our ranch were not, and never had been, part of the community's shared space. They blamed a misprint in an early planning document and unauthorized assumptions by individual members. Translation: Karen messed up, and now they were throwing her under the bus to save themselves. But the real twist came when the insurance claims started rolling in. The ATV owners had tried filing for property damage against Grandpa. Their insurers sent inspectors. One came out and interviewed me while I was refilling the water trough. He had a checklist and a camera and a look that screamed he'd rather be anywhere else. After 2 hours, he packed up, shook my hand, and said, "Honestly? They're lucky the man didn't just cut the tires and call it a day. I've seen worse responses to trespassing." Within the week, all 3 claims were denied. Reason: vehicles were parked illegally on private property, and damage occurred as a direct result of their unlawful presence. Karen's phone must have lit up like a bonfire that night. I imagined her sitting in her living room, surrounded by angry texts from former friends whose weekend joyride turned into a $1,000 mistake. That evening, Grandpa came out to the porch with a tin cup of tea and sat down like nothing in the world had changed. I asked him if he thought Karen had learned her lesson. He took a long sip, eyes fixed on the glowing sky where the sun was settling behind the ridge. "People like her don't learn," he said. "They just get quieter when they realize the world don't run on their rules." And with that, he closed his eyes and leaned back in his rocker, as peaceful as the land he defended. A week after the article ran and the insurance claims were denied, Karen tried one last desperate move to save face. Word spread that she had contacted a local lifestyle blogger and arranged an image rehabilitation interview. She called it a healing picnic and planned to host it at the public park downtown, complete with catered sandwiches, vintage quilts, and curated apologies. The flyer even had the words "reconnecting with the community" scrolled across it in a curly font, right above a smiling photo of Karen holding a tray of lemonade like she hadn't just caused a minor legal scandal. Grandpa saw the flyer tacked to the bulletin board outside the feed store and didn't say a word. He just stared at it for a moment, then bought an extra sack of grain and whistled his way out of the store. When I asked him later if he was going to show up, he said, "A man don't need to sit through a staged apology to know it's fake. Besides, I've got real chores to do." Still, part of me wanted to see it fall apart. And it did, just not the way I expected. The picnic started mid-afternoon, and the news crew she invited arrived right on time. Karen had laid out everything perfectly. She wore a pastel blue dress and white sandals. The tables were draped with floral cloth, and platters of cucumber sandwiches were positioned beside pitchers of flavored water with floating lemon slices. Her voice was sweet, rehearsed, overly pleasant. She smiled for the cameras, hugged kids she'd never met, and spoke about the misunderstanding with phrases like "lesson learned" and "bridging differences." It might have worked, if not for the reporter. See, the cameraman wasn't just some junior intern. He'd been on the job 15 years, and his brother-in-law just so happened to be one of the guys Karen had tried to drag into that picnic mess. So when the reporter casually asked about the ATVs and the welding incident, expecting a humble recounting, Karen slipped. Her mask cracked for just a second. Her tone turned sharp. She called Grandpa a lunatic with a blowtorch, muttered something about Hicks with land envy, and forgot the cameras were still rolling. The next day, the clip aired, and it did not go the way she intended. It opened with her smiling beside the picnic table, then hard cut to her snapping, "This isn't about trespassing, it's about control. That man thinks he owns the entire county because he's got a barn and a bad attitude." The last shot before the credits rolled was a wide view of the empty park, half the guests having already left before the sandwiches were even touched. People talked. At the diner, at the hardware store, in line at the post office, everywhere. It wasn't just that Karen had failed to apologize. It was that she tried to rewrite the story and got caught. The more she tried to fix her image, the worse it looked. Her cousin, the HOA board chair, quietly resigned the next morning. Rumor was he didn't want his name tied to the upcoming audit the county had suddenly scheduled. Grandpa didn't gloat. He just installed a new security light over the barn door and went back to work like nothing had changed. Meanwhile, Karen's problems multiplied. The insurance companies hadn't just denied claims, they'd flagged the incident for liability review. Her guests had each received county citations for trespassing, and 2 of them had been served warnings about their ATV registration. The HOA's legal team began reaching out to Karen for statements, and apparently, she wasn't cooperating. Her name appeared in another news blurb, this time regarding misuse of HOA leadership privilege and potential civil infractions. It didn't make the front page, but it sure made the rounds on neighborhood message boards. One afternoon, a car rolled slowly down our dirt road. It was unfamiliar, sleek, and clearly not from around here. Grandpa spotted it from the porch and stood up, setting his book aside. The car stopped just short of the gate, and a woman stepped out. Not Karen, but someone younger, nervous, clutching a manila envelope. She introduced herself as a representative of Karen's legal team. Said she was delivering a formal cease and desist letter regarding defamatory statements and harassment. Grandpa took the envelope, opened it, and skimmed it silently. He nodded once, folded the paper neatly, then walked to the barn without saying a word. A minute later, he returned, not with a weapon or a threat, but with a laminated copy of our land deed, a printed list of trespassing codes, and a signed letter from the county confirming our complaint was valid and protected under state ordinance. He handed it all to her with the same look he gave coyotes near the henhouse. She didn't even make it back to the car before apologizing and promising to relay the documents to her superior. Karen didn't send anyone else after that. Her house went up for sale the next week, though the price dropped 3 times before it caught any serious attention. Seems buyers were hesitant to purchase property linked to someone under investigation by both the HOA and a regional land use board. People remembered the story. They remembered the photos. And worst of all, they remembered the tape of her calling a respected elder a lunatic on public television. That wasn't the kind of thing that faded fast in a small town. One Saturday morning, I was helping Grandpa install new wire along the eastern fence when an older neighbor, Mrs. Brooks, pulled up with a tray of lemon bars and a grin on her face. She told us she'd heard Karen's closing fell through, again. Apparently, the buyer backed out after finding out the property line had several unresolved zoning questions tied to it, thanks to the false shared use claims the HOA once made. That mess was still being untangled, and nobody wanted to buy into a legal knot. Grandpa thanked her for the bars and told her to leave the tray. He'd return it next time he was in town. When she left, he didn't say much, but I could tell he was satisfied. Not the kind of gloating satisfaction people chase on social media, but a quieter, deeper one. The kind that comes when justice happens the old-fashioned way, slow but solid. That evening, I watched as he walked the fence one more time, checking every post and latch with care. The sun had dipped low, and the sky turned that honey-orange glow that makes even the dust seem golden. At the far end, where the ATVs had once been parked like trophies of entitlement, the grass had started to grow back. There were still a few scorched marks where the welding torch had kissed the metal, but they were fading now. The land was healing. Grandpa stood there for a moment, hands on his hips, gazing out over the field. Then, just before heading back, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small metal sign he'd made earlier in the shop. With practiced hands, he nailed it to the fence. It read, "Private property. Park here, stay forever." And with that, he turned and walked back toward the house, as if the whole saga had been just another line on a long list of chores. By late afternoon, the field looked like a carnival that had been hit by a tornado, then immediately trampled by livestock. Tents flapped half-collapsed in the warm wind, several folding chairs were overturned, and a half-deflated air mattress had somehow ended up stuck in the tree near the north fence. Samson was still roaming freely, now wearing what looked like a Hawaiian lei around his neck that he'd pulled from one of Karen's decorative picnic baskets. He trotted with pride, stopping only to investigate a suspicious duffel bag before rolling it downhill with his nose. Karen had retreated to her tent earlier but re-emerged, red-faced and wearing new sandals, clearly trying to reassert control. She barked orders at her guests, blaming the donkey, the field, the layout, and the gross farm smell, but never herself. Her friend Todd, the one who had tried to use a tent peg to open a wine bottle, looked like he had aged 5 years in an afternoon. Karen pointed to the barn and muttered something to him before marching back toward Grandpa's porch like she owned the place. I saw her coming and nudged Grandpa, who didn't even flinch. He was working on some wire, sitting under the porch fan with a set of pliers and a smirk on his face. Karen didn't bother with greetings this time. She came in swinging with fake legal jargon and some heavy breath from stumping through Donkichurn dirt. "I demand you secure that animal," she shouted. "He's dangerous. He ruined our camping setup, chewed my extension cord, and he just stole my friend's shoe." Grandpa didn't even look up. He's got taste. That shoe was hideous. Karen's jaw tightened. "This is harassment. I'm going to contact the county. You're interfering with an organized outdoor experience. My guests paid for this." Grandpa finally looked up. "Paid who?" "That's none of your business." "Oh, but it is. You're charging money for people to trespass on my field, camp outside my barn, and get chased by my donkey." "It's a pop-up retreat," she snapped. "It's for wellness." "Wellness sure looks a lot like squatting." She started pacing, mumbling about bylaws, citizen rights, and public pathways. Grandpa stood slowly, dusted off his jeans, and walked over to the barn. He didn't say anything, just undid the top latch and swung one side of the big door inward. Karen's eyes lit up like she thought he was offering a tour. But instead of welcoming her inside, he pointed to the barn floor, then looked straight at me. "Go ahead and prep it." I nodded, already knowing what he meant. While Karen was ranting to no one in particular, Grandpa walked around the back of the barn and started unlatching a series of gates, each one part of a quiet plan he'd likely been working on since the first time Karen misused the term community space. He released 2 more animals from their smaller side pens, Clementine the goat and Elvis the rooster. While neither were as aggressive as Samson, they both had very personal grievances against loud music and unnatural perfumes, both of which Karen and her guests brought in abundance. The trio of animals began their coordinated chaos with military precision. Clementine went straight for the yoga mat that had somehow survived Samson's earlier visit and shredded it like she was making confetti. Elvis, in his eternal war against anything that moved fast, began chasing one of Karen's guests who had attempted a morning jog through the corn rows. That poor guy never saw it coming and screamed louder than the chickens during feed time. Karen, still not grasping that this wasn't an accident but a slow and deliberate rural chess match, pulled out her phone and started recording. "This is going on the HOA website. You'll be lucky if you're not fined into the Stone Age." "You keep saying HOA like it means something out here," Grandpa called out. "We ain't got one. You've been making that up since your fake newsletter." Her lips curled. "You can't stop me. I know my rights. I paid for this spot." "Not to me, you didn't." She looked uncertain for the first time, as if it had finally dawned on her that maybe, just maybe, she had no legal standing. But that didn't stop her. Instead, she pivoted into a new angle. She demanded we compensate her for damages caused, apparently, by aggressive farm animals that she never had permission to be around in the first place. She waved a folder full of what she claimed were booking confirmations, insurance disclaimers, and an email from someone named Fields and Living. I glanced at the papers and saw typos on every page. "Did you actually pay money to a site that lists barns with keywords like rustic luxury hay bungalows?" I asked, half horrified. Karen didn't answer. Her friends, however, were starting to question everything. Todd finally walked over and asked her point-blank if she'd even confirmed with the landowner. Karen sidestepped the question, pointing at Samson, who had returned to the scene and was currently chewing on the strap of a very expensive-looking duffel bag. "Make it stop," she yelled, running at Samson and waving a broom like she was reenacting a cartoon chase scene. Samson didn't move. He just brayed loudly and sat down in the dirt, blocking access to the portable grill. I turned to Grandpa. "You sure we can't just call the sheriff?" "Oh, we will," he said, walking over to the workshop and returning with a chain. "But not yet. Let's see how far she's willing to push this." That night, we shut the barn tight and installed a temporary chain lock. Not because we feared Karen breaking in, but because Grandpa had plans. I noticed he'd wired a motion light near the upper loft and installed a sensor just behind the side door, the one Karen had tested earlier. It triggered a harmless but stinky deterrent spray made from pine vinegar, peppermint, and chili oil. Strong enough to keep raccoons out for weeks. Karen had no idea what was waiting for her. Just after dark, we heard footsteps crunching near the side door. I watched from the kitchen window as a silhouetted figure crept toward the barn, stopped, tried the handle, and then suddenly jumped back, flailing and spitting. She ran toward her tent holding her face and shouting something about acid. Not acid, Grandpa said from his rocking chair, sipping tea. Just flavor. Down in the field, Elvis finally quieted for the night. Clementine had found someone's fleece blanket and was now curled up in it like a queen. Samson snored loudly under the oak tree. The trespassers were huddled in their tents, damp, confused, and defeated. Karen had one final meltdown at midnight when the solar string lights went out due to a drained power bank. Her scream echoed over the hills. Grandpa smiled, looked out into the dark field, and whispered, "Checkmate's coming." Summer bled into fall, and the east field finally grew back its coat of tall grass, brushing against the fence line like nothing had ever disturbed it. The weld marks faded, hidden beneath weeds and weather, but the story didn't go away. It stuck to the land like the scent of smoke after a brush fire. People still drove past slowly, hoping to catch a glimpse of the infamous fence. Some even asked if they could take photos next to the spot where the ATVs once sat chained to cold iron like guilty dogs. Grandpa never minded, so long as they stayed on the right side of the fence. Karen was gone. Moved 2 towns over, according to someone who'd seen her applying for a position on another HOA board, this time as a communications advisor. Apparently, she was still trying to sell the version of the story where she was the victim of a local lunatic. But that version didn't fly well, not when the videos were still floating online, and the town had adopted Grandpa's quiet stand as something like a badge of honor. Nobody wanted to hear about picnic rights anymore. They wanted to hear about the man who brought a torch to a trespassing problem and walked away with respect. The new owners of Karen's house were a quiet couple from out west, no interest in drama or community rules. They put up a simple sign out front that read "Private property, no committees." The town found that hilarious. They even got invited to the church potluck faster than most folks who'd been here 5 years. I guess they understood something Karen never did. This wasn't a town where you earned trust by managing people. You earned it by knowing when to keep your hands off other people's fences. Grandpa never brought up her name again. He treated her like a windstorm that had passed through and left the barn door rattling for a while. But every now and then, when he'd sit on the porch in the evening, sipping his tea and watching the shadows stretch long across the field, I'd catch a smirk twitch at the edge of his mouth. The kind that said he knew more than he let on. The kind that told you the battle was long over, but the lesson had taken root. One weekend, we hosted the annual harvest dinner at the ranch. Long tables under string lights, neighbors bringing pies and casseroles, music playing from a speaker hooked to the porch outlet. It was tradition, but that year, it felt a little different. More people came. Some we hadn't seen in years. They brought folding chairs and stories, and more than a few of them found their way to the corner of the fence, pointing and laughing quietly. One woman brought a small wooden sign and asked Grandpa if she could hang it there for the night. It read, "Welded where they weren't welcome." Grandpa didn't say yes. He just nodded, and that was enough. That night, after the last slice of pie was scraped clean and the fire pit had died to glowing coals, Grandpa stood in the quiet with his hands in his pockets, staring out toward the dark outline of the trees. I joined him, the sounds of laughter still echoing faint behind us. For a long moment, he didn't speak. Then he said, almost to himself, "I didn't weld those machines to be clever. I did it to make 'em remember." I nodded. "They won't forget." He glanced sideways at me, eyes squinting under his brow. "Good. People forget fast these days. They forget boundaries. Forget that not everything's theirs for the taking just because it looks empty." I didn't need to ask what he meant. The land was never really empty. It held history, stories, work, and roots too deep for shallow feet. Karen and her friends had seen a field and thought it was free space. But to Grandpa, that was the mistake. They didn't see the years spent plowing, seeding, fencing, or chasing stray cattle back from the brush. They saw open space and called it shared. But it had never been theirs to share. A few days later, the local paper printed a small editorial about the changing tone of the town. It talked about how residents were beginning to question the HOA's role, how new families were requesting clearer property rights, how neighbors were organizing informal gatherings outside the influence of board members. They didn't mention Karen. They didn't need to. The shift was already in motion. People had seen what happened when power went unchecked, and they'd seen what it looked like when someone stood up to it without shouting. With patience. With principle. And, when necessary, with a torch. That week, Grandpa made a new addition to the fence. Not another sign or camera. Just a small iron plaque, welded discreetly near the base of the same post where the first ATV had been attached. It wasn't big or flashy. You had to be standing right there to see it. It read, "Respect grows here." He didn't announce it or pose for a photo. He didn't even tell me he was making it. I only found out when I saw the fresh weld and the soot still clinging to the post. I asked him if it was for the town, a message or a reminder. He shook his head. No. It's for the land. It remembers who stood up for it. As the last leaves fell and winter crept in, things settled down. The fence held. No more unauthorized trails appeared. The town, still laughing about t-shirts and bumper stickers, also began speaking more seriously about land rights and community overreach. The HOA changed leadership entirely. Karen's cousin disappeared from public life. And as for Karen herself, the last anyone heard, she was trying to start a landscaping blog and calling herself a rural culture consultant. Which was funny, because the only culture she ever encountered out here welded her picnic plans to a fence and sent them back in pieces. On one especially cold morning, I watched as Grandpa carried a small metal box out to the barn. He placed it on a shelf, right next to a worn hammer and a roll of fencing wire. I asked what was in it. He smiled. The torch. I blinked. You're putting it away? He nodded. For now. Long as folks remember where they can and can't park, she can rest. And just like that, it was over. The feud, the noise, the tension, it had all resolved the way it started. Not with yelling or fighting, but with steel and silence. The field was quiet again. The land was his again. And even if new trouble came down the road someday, Grandpa would be ready, not because he had a torch, but because he had something stronger. He had history, patience, and the confidence that when the land speaks, he listens. After all, some fences are built of wood and wire. But the ones that last? They are made of stories. And this one? This one's welded in place.